coming up. Are EVs really that slow when you're doing a long trip? Well, let's find out. Hey everyone, G here. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to do another road trip with a difference. Now, I've just come back from a trip from Perth. I had a great trip to visit my mum and brother there. Now, and while I was in Perth, my brother actually drove his Model 3 Performance around, or I should say his old car. He actually sold it to a friend in Perth, but anyway, he had the use of it while he was there. And interestingly enough, we did see a few Teslas around in Perth. There seems to be quite a few of them. And I checked this car out that we saw on the freeway. Now it says Noice, Noice, which is sort of Aussie slang for nice. It's from a TV show, a comedy show. Or it could mean be no ice, as in don't be an ice vehicle, be an EV. What do you think out there? What do you think he meant? Or could it just mean both? Maybe he was clever. Anyway, on to today's trip. So as you know, I very rarely drive in one day from Perth to Kalgoorlie or vice versa. And that's because, even long before I had an ice vehicle, my wife and I and our little dog Zoey, we like to stop everywhere and explore and see things. And of course we always stop for meals and toilet breaks and things like that, so it's not as if we would always drive straight through anyway. Now the trip is about just under 600 kilometers, and according to Google Maps it's roughly 6.5 hours to do that trip. I think most people who are watching this would be the sort of person that would at least stop for some meals and a toilet break and so on. And if you've got kids or pets, they often need walks or they need to burn off some energy, so it's pretty easy to, make stops when you do a long trip, no matter what vehicle you are driving. And if you're the sort of person who's just going to speed everywhere and, just fill up and nothing else and eat while you're driving and so on, well, I don't think, an EV's not going to be for you no matter what, but most people aren't like that. Now, before we jump in, just want to say a quick thanks to everyone out there for subscribing, and thanks to all my new subscribers, really appreciate it. If you're new to EVs or the Atto 3, I'll try and give you some information about charging on a long trip and what you should do to prepare, but I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to bore those listeners who are already familiar with it, but we'll delve in a little bit. Anyway, on to the trip. So if you're going to do a long trip in an EV, one thing you'll need to do is to plan your charging. So in Western Australia, the WA EV network has the fast charging network, and you can see here on the map the ChargeFox app, which you'll need to download. There's 3 fast chargers between Kalgoorlie and Perth. There's also some, of course, in Perth and Kalgoorlie itself, but there's 3 spots where you may need to charge on the way depending on what sort of EV you have. Just out of interest, I have it on very good authority that the fast chargers will also be opening up in Northam soon, which is another spot between Perth and Kalgoorlie. Now the 3 spots where you may wish to charge at, one is Merredin. Now Merredin's about 260 kilometres east of Perth, so it's roughly halfway between Perth and Cal. Then another 105 kilometres east is the little town of Southern Cross, which is another little town which also has a few facilities which we'll go into more later on. And then finally, not that you probably would need it, but there is a further fast chargers available at Cunderdin. Now Cunderdin is just 40 odd k's from Kalgoorlie itself. So like I said, you'd have to plan how you want to do it depending on your battery size and your range of your car. Now I will just quickly go over a summary of the Atto 3 here. So these are my sort of figures which I get in terms of range. Now the BYD is a 60 kilowatt hour battery. Around the city, the town, I can comfortably get well over 400 k's if I'm driving the car around town. On a highway, you're going to need to reduce that by 20 to 25%. So I always say, I've never had less than 300 on a long trip, but you can probably get more than that as well. It really just depends on what speed you go, because that will affect economy. So it's a bit like the reverse of an ICE car. On a highway trip, you'll use more and you'll use less going around town. So to Perth to Kalgoorlie, what do I do on this trip? Well, I normally stop definitely at Merredin, so I'm going to do what I would do if I'm travelling from Perth to Kalgoorlie. So I would stop at Merredin and I would charge to somewhere between 60 and 85% there. Now, the reason you don't need to go to 100%, well, there's a couple of reasons. One, well, only 105 kilometers away in Southern Cross, you've got fast chargers again, which means you can stop in there and charge again. Secondly, it will depend upon your vehicle, but for me, it's a bit risky to go all the way from Merredin to, to Kalgoorlie. So, and even Coolgardie is a little bit, further than I'd like to. So it makes sense to charge in Southern Cross to make sure you've definitely got enough charge to get to Kalgoorlie. And the last reason is due to the charging speed drop-off. Now, I won't go into that too much detail today, but if you're fairly new to EVs and you're not sure, just be aware that when you charge a vehicle using DC, which is the fast charging, the speed of that charge will be quickest when the battery's state of charge is lower. So, from about 10 to 80% is the sweet spot, and that's where your battery will pretty much charge at the highest rate. But again, that depends on the type of vehicle you have. Now, the reason why it drops off at 80% primarily is to protect the battery, and it's just thermal management of the battery. But that's all I'm going to comment on that for today. Now, as I've been doing the narration here, you've probably seen some footage of the towns of Merredin and Southern Cross and what you can do when you stop there. So I'll just very, very briefly tell you what you can do. So if it's food you want, there's cafes, there's a Subway and an IGA. There's a couple of little parks you can go to. You can either take your dog or your children there. There's also a couple of museums. And there's a bakery, chemist, banks, and numerous other shops. These are all within walking distances of the chargers. So basically, just park your car up, put it on charge, and then away you go. You can do a few things. Go to the toilet, of course, if you need to do that. And when you get back, your car's probably close to being charged. Now, Southern Cross is a smaller town, but it also has a few facilities. It's got some cafes. There's a service station which makes nice food as well, and there are some parks, ovals, a swimming pool, and some small shops. So yeah, there's plenty to do, especially like I said, if you're traveling with children or a dog that needs a walk. So my trip, the trip where I went, my first stop ended up being in the little town of Meckering, which is about an hour and 35 minutes from Perth. It's 135 kilometers to get there. Now, our trip actually started off in Ampol. That was where I was. I was at the Amp Charge in Cannington. That was the last place I was before I left Perth. And I finished charging at, around about 10:15 was when I pulled out of the service station there to go on with my trip. Okay, let's join me. Okay, so I left Perth at 10:15. That's the time I left, and it's now 11:45, so I've been driving for 1.5 hours. Now, I filled up to 95%. I'm already down to 59 at the moment. Now, that trip meter's wrong there, so I'm not exactly sure how many kilometers I've done, but that the trip meter's definitely wrong. I didn't set that until later. But I should easily reach Merredin, and I guess I'm going to have to spend about 45 minutes charging there. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what the total time is to get to Kalgoorlie. You can see here the economy is showing at 18.3. So it looks like I might have just a little bit of crosswind. So it's not superb economy, but it's not the worst. Anything better than 20 for me on a long trip, I'm fairly happy with. But that gets me the 300 range, and you can usually find a charger within that. And as you know, between Perth and Kalgoorlie, there's a couple of fast chargers. In fact, there's 3 lots: Merredin, Southern Cross, and Coolgardie. Okay, so we're driving into the little town of Meckering, and I'm going to have just a little few minutes break here. Maybe stop and have something to drink and just have a 5-minute break. Now, if you weren't doing this trip in a hurry, there are some great attractions in Meckering. There's the Camera Museum, which is a great little museum. If you've got any interest at all in photography or filmmaking, the history of it all, it's really a fantastic place to go. It's fairly cheap from memory to go in and have a look, and they've got literally thousands of cameras. The other thing is the Meckering earthquake ruins. So Meckering was the site of an earthquake, it was way back in the 60s, I think. Thankfully no one was killed, but there's this farmhouse you can visit where the farmhouse literally collapsed, and a small baby was very lucky to survive. So you can go there, and it's quite moving to go there and have a look at this site where the baby survived and the half demolished house. Okay, so anyway, from Meckering our next stop is Merredin, which is about an hour and 23 minutes or so. It's 128 kilometers according to Google Maps. So yeah, I only had a little 5-minute break in Meckering, and then I was on my way to get to Merredin. Okay, so I've just left Meckering after just stopping there for a drink. So you can see the economy is ticking along at about 17.9. I'm happy to stick on about 105 at the moment, which you can see in real terms is 102, which is a pretty good speed, and you get reasonable economy. Once I get a bit closer to Merredin, I think I might speed up a little bit once I know I'm easily going to make it, which I will. So you can go a little bit faster, but I'm usually happy to stick to around about 100, just over 100. Alright, let's keep going. Beautiful morning. Look at that weather. And this part of the journey it's fairly flat around here, and you can see you start to get quite a bit of farmland, and you've got the water pipeline there, which is fairly close to the road for quite a bit of the trip too. So it's a fairly nice place to drive, and later on in the year, in a month or two, it'll be nice and green when the crops start to green up. So hopefully all that rain will move inland later on today, but we're ahead of it at the moment, which is good. Okay, so I'm getting to just over 100 k's now to go to Merredin, so I've increased my speed. So in real terms I'm about 108, 109, and we're going to make Merredin no issues. So you can go a little bit faster. It's probably not going to add very much time to the charging. Through Kellerberrin, and a great place if you want something to eat is this United service station here on the right. They've got some great food, they've got pies, and you can get chips and stuff there as well. And obviously if you're still unlucky enough to be driving an ICE vehicle, you can get petrol there, but hey, we won't need to worry about that, so we're going to keep going here. 56 to Merredin. So we're about 5 kilometres from Merredin, and you can see the time there is about 8 minutes past 1. So we're coming up on 3 hours, which is pretty much what you normally expect coming from Perth. Maybe a little bit less if you're coming from one of the outer suburbs, but I came from Cannington, as you know. So we're down to 20%. So we've used 75% I should say, since we've left Perth. It just plugged in 20%, and it's saying an hour and 5 minutes, but I suspect it's going to be less than that. And it's only 105 k's roughly to Southern Cross, so I don't need to go to 100% here, because I can always top up in Southern Cross. Alright, so we're charging away. I'm going to go for a nice walk, maybe have something to eat and drink, and yeah, it's warmed up quite a lot, so it's probably about 25. I'll have to put some sunscreen on, I think, before I go for a walk. Yeah, the weather's not too bad, no rain. It looks like I'm going to well and truly miss the rain. So anyway, let's go for a walk. Alright, I've just got myself a coffee. I went for a nice walk there, and I can't believe I'm already up to 62%. So I may even go up to about 80%, and then I think I will go to Southern Cross, and I won't have much to do there then to again probably go up to around 80 or 90% before my last leg. And look at that temperature, it's saying 34 outside. I can hardly believe that after the last couple of days in Perth. But there you go, it certainly feels it sitting here in the car. And I haven't mentioned yet one of the things I did in Perth, and that was I had to get my shade cloth looked at. It was slightly damaged somehow. I went to open it and it started to tear. They've had to take it off, and they can't replace it for a couple of weeks. So I'll talk more about that later on. But yeah, it's quite warm without it, I can say that. I'm going to have to get something and tape it on there, some of those little aluminium things which keep the shade off, and I might just have to put something temporary there, because gee, it really makes a difference. I don't know how you could drive around a car with just an open sunroof in Australia. I mean, it's already May and it's still hot, as you can see. But anyway, we'll just stay here for a little bit longer and then we'll keep going. So just under 45 minutes in Merredin, we put 42.81 kilowatts into the battery, $25.69, and here's the economy. So for 75% battery usage, we did 262 kilometers. That all means an economy of 17.17 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. That's pretty respectable considering the speed we did. It is 2 o'clock exactly, and we're just leaving Merredin now. Okay, so we're just under 30 k's from Southern Cross. The temperature's dropped quite a bit. We're down to 27 now, and I don't think we're going to get any rain. Although my wife and I spoke to her earlier said it did look a bit threatening in Kalgoorlie, so who knows. We're passing some lovely fields here. Anyway, we're about 10-15 minutes away from Southern Cross, and then we're going to probably charge till about 85% when we're there, so that shouldn't take very long at all. We're in Southern Cross. I can't remember exactly what it was. I've been here a few minutes. I was just talking to my brother on the phone. But anyway, we're parked up. We're charging here in Southern Cross. These are the chargers if you haven't seen them. And I'd say we're only going to spend about 15-20 minutes here. Okay, so if you're wanting to go to Kalgoorlie from Southern Cross, you're probably going to need around about 75% on the battery, and if you stick to under 20, you should be able to easily make that. So I'm just going to go for a little bit of overkill and maybe get it up to about 87%. So I've been here, I think, about 20 minutes so far, and I've just been for a nice walk and gone to the toilet, and I'm just going to hang around just for a couple more minutes, and then we'll do our final leg. So it's not too bad. I think it's comparable to an ICE vehicle, of course, just depending on how much you normally stop. And normally, as you know, I would not do a trip quite this fast. I would normally take my time. Okay, so I took it up to 87%, 23 minutes I spent there, put in 24.42 kilowatts as you can see, and the cost was $14.65. The economy then was pretty good economy today, again considering I kept on a pretty good speed there, so it finished up at 17.71 kilowatts for that leg. Now moving on to the final leg then of our trip, so that's Southern Cross all the way to Kalgoorlie. It's about 2.5 hours to do the trip, and the total length according to Google Maps is 226 kilometers. Saw my receipt there, so we spent 23 minutes there topping up in Southern Cross, which, you know, it's not that long really to wait, I don't think, to get that charge. So there you go, we're just on 86%. And we're now going to do the final leg to Kalgoorlie. So of course I'm recording this video in early May 24, and as I mentioned in my last trip going through here, there is some roadworks east of Southern Cross. It looks like they're all around 80 at the moment, so just be aware of that if you're in this time frame and going through this area. And we've hit a 60 zone, so was 80 for quite a while, but now we've gone into a 60 zone. If I remember correctly, this is going to go for a few kilometres before it's back to an open speed limit. So I've got no idea what they're doing here. It's possible it could be a dual lane, a bit of an overtaking lane. I fail to see what else it could be really, with them widening it so far. So you can see it extends for a good 10 kilometres at least, east of Southern Cross. Beautiful afternoon now. Late afternoon here. The sun's probably going to set in an hour and a half, so I'm not going to be much past the sunset by the time I get home. But you can see here the economy is sitting on about 18.1. I've got plenty of room to move there, so I'm comfortably going to have enough charge to get home. So I'm doing about 115, which in real terms is about 112, 113, and the police are unlikely to pull you over for doing 2 or 3 over in Western Australia. I mean, I've never been pulled over for doing that. So that's what I'm going to stick on. As long as my economy stays well under 20, I will easily be able to stay on that speed, which is good. We'll make up a bit of lost ground. Not a trip that I would do often. As I've mentioned, I normally would easily take 2 days because I do like to explore and see things, but just to show that it is possible to travel fast between towns in an EV if you want to. So the sun is setting here and the time is 10 past 5. I'm still on track to make Kalgoorlie by 6 o'clock, well and truly before 6. So yeah, we can go away and work out exactly how long. The economy for the past 50, take that for what it's worth, sitting on about 18.4. So I'm sort of just cruising along at 100, just above 100 at the moment. I just want to make sure that I can definitely do this all in one charge. Alright, so how about that? We're just about to drive into Kalgoorlie. Check out that time. It's 15:42, so 5:42. So definitely well before 6 o'clock. So I'll go away and work out exactly how long that trip took. But you know, that's a pretty good time, I think. In my humble little Atto 3, I think if you had a Tesla or you know, either a car that charges faster or has a longer range, you could do that in even less time. But for you know, for the humble little Atto, it's pretty good even for that. So yeah, so that was my final time. Yeah, around about that 7.5 hour mark to do just under 600 kilometers on that trip, which is, like I said, not something I normally do, but I was missing my wife and I was happy to get home after my trip in Perth. So there you go, that's a little bit of information about the Atto. The only other last tip I would give is, before you embark on a trip, maybe just go onto the app, check the chargers are definitely open, and if for some reason they're showing as faulty, you got a chance then to ring up the company and find out. So only once I had an issue at Merredin, and you might have seen that in the previous video, and I just rang up ChargeFox over the phone and they managed to get it going in about 5 or 10 minutes. So apart from that, in about 7 or 8 months of driving EVs now between Perth and Kalgoorlie, I've never had an issue with the chargers, I'm happy to say. So they seem to be pretty reliable here in Western Australia, which is pretty darn good. Okay, that's it for today's episode. So yeah, hope that was of some use to people, especially those who think that, you know, it's very slow driving an EV with the charging. Well, it's really not that. It's very easy to plan your trip around your brakes. And, you know, I'm happy to say that the WA EV network is growing pretty rapidly. About a year ago, it was virtually non-existent outside the metropolitan area of Perth. So, you know, it's pretty good for Western Australia, I think. Alright, thanks again for joining us today. I really appreciate you sticking around, and I'd love it if you would subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate the support. Okay, as usual, take care on those roads, stay safe and watch out for trucks, give them plenty of room, and we'll see you very soon. We've got some great stuff coming up on Down Under EV Adventures. This is G signing off. Bye for now.